elements or classification might not fit anything above, so we just put it here. Now, these are the basic cost classifications that you're going to come across. Most cases, everything will somehow fit into this. These are not the only ones, but the most common ones. Materials, labor, and other expenses. Now, material costs. We have direct material costs. The direct material is the material that actually goes into making the product, right? If you're a restaurant, what would your direct cost be? Eh? The ingredients, yes. Okay. The actual food that you put on the plate, the cost of that food, the cost of the meat, the cost of the rice, the bread, etc., would be the direct cost. Those actually form a part of the product that you are producing. Here we have timber in furniture. If you're making a table, the direct cost is the cost of the lumber that is in that table. Everybody clear? Okay. Now, indirect cost. This is one which a lot of small business people tend to leave out. Okay? But it's very important. It doesn't form a part of the product itself, but you must incur that cost in order to produce it, right? If you are using a sewing machine, there are lots of things which go into that, using the operation of that sewing machine, which is not in the product. But without you putting it in, you cannot produce, right? Sometimes some items are direct material, as they are showing us an example like thread. But it is so small that you could not meaningfully tell somebody how much you spend on the thread for that one shirt. Clear? What you would be able to say that today I use 5 reels of thread, and that 5 reels of thread produce 100 shirts. What is the cost of the thread in those shirts? It is so small that it is not meaningful when you're analyzing the cost of a shirt to put in the cost of the thread. So that would also go into indirect. So indirect has 2 definitions here. A cost which didn't directly go into the production of the goods or service, or a cost which is so small that you do not track it by itself for each product. Clear? Now, labor. Seems to be quite obvious, right? It's what you pay the workers, including yourself, to produce your goods, right? You have wages, salaries, commission, bonus, whatever you call it. These are costs that without incurring these costs, without paying these people, you could not produce your goods or services. That's an important element and has to be taken into account. Remember, as beginners, you need to pay yourself too. I've seen many analyses where people put down some very fancy business plans and costing, and there's nothing in it for themselves. And when you said, what about you? I said, oh, I just do it. But it's a cost, and if you leave out that cost, it can affect your analysis. We have indirect labor. Indirect labor, as in the case of indirect material. These are labor costs that you incur, but the person did not actually sit down and make the item. Okay? The person who swept the floor in the factory, without that person actually working in the factory, sweeping the floor, making the work area good enough, you would not be able to produce the way you are producing. But that is in fact a cost of producing that item. Now we have other costs, right? And these other expenses, we sometimes refer to them as overhead. These costs provide, this is the cost of resources that you buy generally for the operation of the factory, the plant, the business, but it does not go directly into producing the goods or item. Now, in the case of a factory, you have to build a factory, you have to buy the machine. Putting the machine in is an important cost, and without having the machine in there, you cannot produce anything. You also have other type of expenses which directly go into making the product. And in the case of, say, electricity, the electricity which actually goes into the machine to enable the machine to produce the product is a direct other cost. The electricity itself is not in the product, but without incurring that, we cannot produce the goods or item. So we have both the direct and the indirect. Please remember, the indirect is significant in many cases. Now, overheads. The aggregate indirect material cost, indirect wages, indirect expenses, all these indirect expenses, we sometimes just group them all together, and we have these three types of costs: your indirect material costs, your indirect labor costs, and your indirect expenses. And we all use our omnibus term, overheads, for them. Now, why is this classification necessary? Why do you think we'd want to have overheads analyzed separately from our direct cost? Can anybody guess? All right. Okay, here's what happened. Let's say we built a factory to produce tables. Let's say we spent $100,000, nice figure, let's use it as US, to put up the plant so that it can produce 100,000 tables per year. What is the cost per table? $1 US, okay? Let us say for some reason we became very efficient and we could produce 200 or 200,000 tables. What would be the cost per table? Eh? Quick, what's the cost per table? It's half, it's now 50 cents. So here it is, our overheads per item reduces with the amount that we produce. Clear? Now, here is a case where we need to understand the behavior of our cost elements so that we know that our direct costs will move directly with what we produce. Our overheads tend to go down per item with the volume we produce. Some people put it as fixed costs and variable costs. The only consideration here is that fixed cost is only fixed over a certain range. If we had decided instead of making 200,000 tables, we want to make 400, we might have to double the size of the factory. So the fixed cost is no longer relevant. And in a nutshell, those are the elements of cost which go together into making up your products. And you need to spend some time knowing what you'll have to put into the product, what the cost of the various elements are, and how your costs behave. If you are not familiar with it, then you're going to find that you're ready to produce something. You have a nice little costing that you do on a piece of paper, and when you get down in the practice to try and implement, you are way off. Thank you.